My name is Louis Zamperini. I was born January 26, 1917 in Olean, New York. I moved to California for my health. I had pneumonia. And so ever since I was 2 years old, I lived in Torrance, California, just south of LA, about 20 miles. And I'm afraid I was in constant conflict with the Torrance police. I was a rascal, and I think it all started with I couldn't speak English, and the other kids were teasing me. They wanted to hear me swear in Italian. And so they had me going all the time. I was really uptight, you know. These were your bullies, they call them today. And so my dad got me some weights and a punching bag, and I started getting in shape. And so then after a few months, I started fighting back. And when I started fighting back, they stopped teasing me. But in the meantime, I continued with my errant ways, and getting in trouble until I was 15, and by that time the chief of police had it, my family had it, my older brother had it, the principal of the school had it, and they got their heads together and said, we got to find something for this kid to do. So I was too light for football, so they shoved me out on the track, what they call an inter-class track meet, and I had been dissipating. I started smoking when I was 5, and during that time, it was prohibition. But everybody made beer, wine, and other things, and we knew who made it. And when they're at the movies on Saturday night, we would hijack the stuff. And even if they knew we took it, they couldn't turn us into the police, or they'd go to jail. And so that was my life as a teenager, until my brother got me out on the track, what they call an inter-class track meet. And of course, I came in last. Oh, I never suffered so much in my life. The pains of exhaustion, that's the worst. And that was it, no more running. So a week later, we're having our first dual meet with Narbonne High School, and everybody insisted I represent the class, the school in this race. The same 660-yard run, and they finally talked me into it. And again, I suffered those pains of exhaustion, and I just hung back, dragged. I didn't want to get any more pain than I could handle. They had 3 runners, and Torrance had just myself. The first 2 runners from Narbonne had finished, and the third man was ahead of me, about 50 yards to go. And I wasn't about to pass him, you know, until the students, 1,000 students from my high school, started screaming, "Come on, Louis." Well, those were beautiful words to me, because I had no idea that anyone at all knew my name. And here 1,000 students are hollering, "Come on, Louis," and that tasted pretty good. And I just got up a little adrenaline, I suppose, and I finally nipped this guy at the tape about 6 inches and came in third. So after that, I thought about that recognition. That was important to me, and I think it's important to all athletes. The thing that inspires you and creates a desire to go ahead and become a champion is recognition. And so that night I had to make a decision, and that was no doubt the first wise decision of my life. I decided to go all out to become a runner. Now, considering my life, you think that was an impossibility. My family thought it was an impossibility, my brother thought, but I made up my mind, and I became a fanatic trainer. No more dessert. I ran everywhere, no hitchhiking. Redondo and back, 4 miles, Hermosa and back. I'd run like 12 miles on a Saturday. I'd hit the mountains, run around lakes, jump on, and I got so I liked it. I was not getting tired anymore and fatigued, and I enjoyed mainly not running around the track, but running in the wilderness and jumping over streams. I can remember on a number of occasions chasing deer down a hill, just for the fun of it. And so all that running, and in those days there were no stopwatches around, so I had no idea how fast I was running. Didn't even care. I just started enjoying running. And finally, at the end of summer, the first running race was Far West AAU cross country at UCLA, 2 miles, about 101 runners. And I can remember looking at those runners, 101, I was just hoping I wouldn't get last place. Now they had Class A runners, Class B, and Class C. I'm a sophomore, so I'm a Class C. When the race was over, I won by 1/4 mile, or over 1/4, and I couldn't believe it. I said, no, I'm sure I cut a corner. I wouldn't take credit for winning. And the officials said, no, all the tallies are in. You passed every checkpoint. And they said, by the way, you broke all 3 records, Class A, Class B, and Class C, and you ran the 2 miles in 9:57. which was comparable to college running, and I was a sophomore in high school. So that did it. I knew that hard work was the answer, and from then on, I never lost a race for 3.5 years. And of course, I had to set my goals now. I wanted to break the world's record in the high school mile run, which took place, I was a sophomore. And the next year, I was a junior, and the next year, I broke the world record. My senior year, I just took it easy because the Olympics were coming, and I didn't try to break my record, which I could have done with ease. And there were 5 great milers in the nation, all mature college graduates, and their times were so fast that it would be a slim chance for me to make it in the. So the second best 5,000 meter runner in America was coming to California to run, to draw a big crowd and so forth. And my brother said, "I want you to train. You got 2 weeks. I want you to run against this guy." Now, we had no hopes of the Olympics. Just run against him to see how close you can get to a fellow who's going to make the Olympic team. And that would have been a victory in itself. And so he said, there's 12 laps, 188 yards, 3 miles, 188 yards. And I'll let you know when the last lap comes, because I did have a kick. And he miscounted the laps and had me move out the last half mile, which is a long sprint. And my opponent couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't have me in front. He passed me, I passed him, and went like that back and forth. So one of the coaches screamed at us, "You got another lap to go," and he had some sense. And so we set our pace again. But the last 250 yards, I passed him, and much to my surprise, started pulling away 5, 10, 15 yards. Coming down the home stretch, we're lapping a fellow from San Pedro. Now the officials were so excited about this race, they didn't expect me to be in a lap behind him. And they're just looking and not doing their duty, and they forgot to tell this guy to get off the track. 1 step and he's off. And so I'm passing him, I got my momentum going, and they motion him off the wrong way, and so he runs me clear out to the 8th lane. I hit the grandstand, we both collide, and now I look over and my opponent's heading for the tape, so I had to catch him again. And I caught him at the tape about 2 inches. So I knew that I could beat him, the second best runner in America. And this gave me the possibility of making the team. Now, I didn't think about the team at that time until the next day when I got a call from the newspaper that the Olympic Committee had called Torrance to tell him that I qualified for the Olympic tryouts at Randall's Island, New York. And that was a thrill. So how do you get to New York during the Depression? Nobody's got any money. But my dad worked for the big red cars, and so he was allowed a round trip on the Southern Pacific Railway anywhere in America. So I took that ticket, and the merchants in town gave me gear to, suitcase, shaving gear, clothing, and spending money so I could eat on the train and get a hotel room in New York and meals until I either made or did not make the team. Once you make the team, you're under the auspices of the Olympic Committee, and they pay all your clothing and so forth. So I go to New York, but of course I'm to run against the world's record holder in the 2 mile. This is unheard of an American. The Finns were the greatest. And this fellow broke the Finns record, and of course that was scary. So I thought, well, I'll eliminate him. I can't beat him. I'll just have to get second or third. And but the last lap, I was right behind him and his teammate. And I foolishly waited too long. I waited till the last 200 yards, which put me on the curb. And I tried to pass them in the 3rd lane, and they held me in the 3rd lane all the way around. But even so, even though I ran probably 3 strides further, we came in a dead heat. And again, it wasn't important to win. I made the team. And as I tell kids, John Neighbor is a close buddy of mine, and he won 5 gold medals in swimming. And when he was asked what the greatest thrill of his life was, he didn't mention the gold medals. He said, making the Olympic team. So that's the thrill. So now I'm on the team. I'm a member of that worldwide elite group called Olympians, and it's a thrill. And I'm on this ship now with all these great athletes, and they were all my heroes, And I'm going around meeting all the athletes. And but also, I'm on a cruise ship called the SS Manhattan. First class, you had all your dignitaries and movie stars, Joey Brown, the old comedian, and Helen Hayes, and And we were, of course, in the middle class. The only complete deck around was on first class, so we got to work out there every day. And but also on this cruise ship, I found out something I didn't know anything about. All they do is eat. They serve you breakfast, unbelievable, a variety of food, and then a brunch, and then they serve you lunch, and then they serve you afternoon tea, and then dinner, and then a 10 o'clock snack. And I'm going crazy. I never saw so much food in my life, and being a kid from a small town and a poor family, I was trying to make up for time, and I ate an awful lot of food. And in 9 days, I believe I gained 12 pounds. I think that's what it was. And got off the ship at Hamburg and off to Berlin, and then they took us into the most beautiful Olympic village ever made. And it was gorgeous. Fenced in, animals running loose, lakes, stormtroopers walking through, and we'd give them the Heil Hitler salute with a big laugh on our face. And they knew we were kidding. They'd salute back. If we said Heil Adolf, they'd say Heil Hitler, or vice versa. And so they were a lot of fun. But then they had a mess hall that was semicircle, 2 decks high, and an entrance here. So they had a restaurant for each country represented in the Olympic team. And I wanted to try food from all over the world. I started here, and each day I worked my way around and upstairs, and so I wasn't able to lose my weight, and I just kept gaining weight. So I got into the semifinals, and fortunately I made the finals. And in the finals we're running against the world's best were the Finns. Today the world's best are Nigerians, but then it was Finns. They won everything. And they set a pretty hot pace, faster than I was used to running, and especially with the extra weight now. If I had lost that weight, yes, I think I could have kept up the pace. But I'm in the second batch of runners. The first batch are 7 runners up front, 50 yards behind our batch and a few behind us. And the last lap comes, and I'm 50 yards behind the leaders. I remembered something my brother had taught me when I used to complain about the third lap of the mile being tired. And he said, well, so are the other runners. They're all human beings. They're all tired. But think of it this way. You got a lap to go, about 1 minute. Isn't 1 minute of pain worth a lifetime of glory? And I never forgot that. And so I opened up the last lap, and I caught the leaders coming down the home stretch. So I did come in with the leaders. And in doing so, the coach said, you just ran your last quarter in 56 seconds, which was considered impossible for a distance runner. And that evidently caught the attention of Adolf Hitler. He was there every day. And I go back to my box after my shower, and an officer comes over and says, Hitler wants to meet you. First he asked for my name. I said, I didn't win anything. You know, he was shaking hands with the gold medalist. He said, well, he wants to meet you. So I went over to him, and he just reached down, shook my hand, and simply said, the boy with, He said, yeah, the boy with the fast finish. And that was it. So met the Fuhrer, didn't mean anything, but my opinion of him was the same opinion that Marty Glickman had and all the others. He looked like a comedian, and the way he acted, stomping his feet, pounding his legs and face, a mustache and all that. So that was my opinion of him. Well, the games are over, and we collected souvenirs, all the Olympians did, to remind them of their Olympic trip, and now I'm back home entering USC as a freshman. And one of my goals was to break the National Collegiate mile record. My hero was Glenn Cunningham, the greatest miler of that time. And as a 15-year-old kid, I saw him beaten by Bill Bonfron of Princeton, and he broke the National Collegiate record. And it broke my heart. And I had never met Glenn, but I said, I'm going to get that record back for Glenn and me. And eventually I told him. And so I had to have that record. I went back to Minneapolis, and there I was at 10 o'clock at night before the race. Coach Nicholson of Notre Dame, my school's USC, right? He comes to my room and warns me. He said, we just had an Eastern coaches meeting, and the coaches are going to tell their kids to do anything they can to get you out of the race tomorrow. And mainly because at that time our coach, Dean Cromwell, was considered the world's greatest track coach. But the Eastern coaches wouldn't accept that because he never had a distance runner. So I'm the first one, so they can't have that. And so they're going to get me out of the race. And, you know, I'm a tough guy. I said, hey, I can take care of myself. So I decided to move out the whole last half mile because I wanted to go after a real good record. And I never felt like my feet were touching the ground. That's how good a shape I was in. But at the half mile mark, I was boxed in. And I've got a picture of that big showing me boxed in, showing blood running down this leg and that leg into my socks. So I got a 2-inch gash here, scar now, 2 inch here, an inch here. Spike ran through my little toe and 1 broken rib. So when you try to pass them in a tight pack, they come back like that, and that's it. When I got mad at them, they cursed me out. And well, finally the last, so I didn't get a chance to really run all out. But about the last 120 yards, as we broke into the straightaway, they left an opening, slight opening, and I busted through that and went for the tape, and I thought they held me up so much, the race is slow, and I kind of just jogged in like an idiot. And they asked me how fast I ran. I said, well, probably about 4:21, 4:22. They said, you just broke the national collegiate record, 4:08 and 2/10. I couldn't believe it. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have slowed down. But anyway, that's what happened there, and that was unusual to see a track man busted up more than a NFL football player. And so that was my big dream, was that record. I got that, and then I won it again the next year. And now, 1940, Tokyo Olympics, we're all aiming for that. Every world-class athlete in America is focused on Tokyo. And we're training hard, and suddenly we get the announcement, headlines in the papers, the Olympics are canceled. Well, it was quite a blow, adults really couldn't understand it, but for a kid who's been aiming for 4 years for one race, and you're going to hit your peak of your life at that particular year, that was hard to take until Pearl Harbor was hit, and of course we forgot all about being athletes, and like all other Americans, we were of one mind, of one accord, one purpose: get in the war quickly, get it over with as soon as possible. And even overseas, I met 2 or 3 of my Olympic buddies, and they felt the same way. They could care less about running. However, I did run in Hawaii to keep in shape, and I was running 4 12-mile exhibitions at the university, and so I was in shape, so good a shape that the Amateur Athletic Foundation in New York had tried to send for me to come back to run against European runners. Gunder Haig was one of them, and he was the best at that time. And running 4:12 alone, that would put me in his class where he was running 4:4, 4:6. My fastest mile indoors was 4:6 and 7/10, and I wasn't in very good shape. The best shape of my life. I'm in Hawaii, I'm 10 pounds overweight, and still running the best of my life. I wanted to come back, and even though General Arnold, in charge of the Air Force, through a friend, he was a friend of mine indirectly, but they wouldn't allow me to go back because our bomb group was a special bomb group and experimental. We were the first to use the heaviest bomber of the war for dive bombing from 8,000 out of 3,000, and nobody knew that. Even today, people don't know that. In fact, in 1944, a crew did some dive bombing on their own and claimed they were the first to do it. But we were doing it under orders. We were trained to do it with special little 79-cent bomb sights compared to our Norden bomb sight, which was the most sophisticated weapon of World War II. At that time, it cost about $250,000. You can imagine what it's worth today. And so we did the dive bombing. We tried skid bombing, but that was dangerous. It didn't work. Dive bombing worked. Bombing Midway with that particular style of bombing, we so confused the Japanese that they sent their report to Tokyo that they were hit by dive bombers from a carrier. They really believed it, and I think all of Japan believed it, and never found out the truth. So we had a lot of missions up and down the Marshall and Gilberts, bombing Macon and Tarawa and Woji and all those islands in and out, operating out of Canton, a little coral strip, really nothing, just for the coral strip. And but that was our operational point. So to get to Tarawa, we had to fly across the border, like 2 a day. And then our missions were really extremely long because we were operating out of Hawaii, Kahuku. Then I had to fly all the way to Canton, then round trip to Tarawa, and then our next long mission was all the way down to Ellis Islands, which is twice as far, and landing at a little airstrip called Funafuti. And it was just a cute little tropical island, about a mile long, quarter mile wide, and that was marine-based. And there we were told that we're going to, we had a briefing, and General Hale gave us our plan of attack, that we were going to fly over the target at 12 o'clock noon on a crystal clear day like this, and we're going to bomb every plane. 28 planes would fly at the same level, bomb 8,000 feet, which we thought was wrong. We thought we should have been staggered so they couldn't synchronize on the first flight, act, and then just sit back and trigger the gun. So every plane was hit, but our plane, I had targets along the runway, planes and bunkers and a couple of buildings, and then I had an alternate bomb, and I picked a shack at the end of the runway. And that shack I thought was the radio shack, so I blew it up, and then a column of smoke, the smoke shot in the air about 10,000 feet. It was unbelievable. It was such a beautiful picture that it made Life magazine. And 7 Zeros took off, and out of the 7 Zeros, 4 Zeros attacked us, one plane out of 28 planes. And the only reason we can figure that is that they knew our bombs hit their fuel supply, so they're getting even with us. But it got too crowded for 4 planes, so one decided to go off after another flight. And so we had a running battle with 3 Zeros for the next 3 or 4 minutes, which seems like an awful long time in combat. And we shot down all 3 Zeros. I confirmed each one of them, but not before taking on 5 cannon hits and 600 bullet holes. And the first cannon hit came through the nose turret. The navigator's in there now. He's done his job. I dropped my bombs. He's in there protecting the ship. The Zero comes down at 1 o'clock, levels out, and a cannon fire goes through and severs the cable that controls the turret. And so he's in there and can't get out. The little door's about that wide and that high, and the door's turned. So I have to work that turret over to get him out so he can navigate it back to the base. And then I heard help on the intercom. Of course, I went back to the flight deck, and there was a radio man who'd been badly hit, shrapnel through his back and bleeding. He's hanging on the catwalk. The bomb bay doors wouldn't close, which I'll explain. So the bomb bay doors are open, they wouldn't close. The catwalk is 10 inches by 17 feet long. He's hanging there over 8,000 feet of water. And I looked at him, he's looking up at me, and his eyes were just glazed over, and so I knew something was wrong. I couldn't really see anything wrong. I pulled him up on the deck, and then blood started coming out of his sheepskin. I looked at his sheepskin, and all these little holes in the back, and so I gave him a shot of morphine and sulfa, and I'm putting the oxygen mask on him so I can tend to other people. And then I felt something trickling down my neck, and I looked up, and the upper turret had just been hit. The cannon fire went through the radio shack, blew a big hole as big as your head. The shrapnel went over my head, because I'm down on the deck, and ripped up the upper turret gunner's leg and shot off half his foot. So I had to set aside the radio man and then start tending to the upper turret gunner, who, by the way, continued to fire. Now, he did not flinch. He was hit badly. He was in terrible pain. We watched that Zero turn around and come back to finish us off, and I could see the pilot slump in the plane. He hit the pilot, and of course the pilot was dead. The plane spiraled over and hit the beach, so I confirmed that one. And then I heard more help at the waist section of the ship. So I went along the catwalk to the waist section, and there 3 gunners were laid out, blood all over the place, splattered everywhere, stomachs hanging out, and still firing their guns. I mean, this is unbelievable that these guys, under such pain, were determined to get even with the enemy. So what actually happened was, on the nose turret, when that bullet came through and severed the cable of the nose turret, it went by my face. I was looking out the window at the Zeros, and I heard this crack. The bullet went into the wing of the ship. And then I go back to the waist section, and here 3 men are laid out from a cannon fire that hit the waist section just below the window. It severed all the control wires on the right side of the ship and penetrated the three gunners. Another cannon fire took off the right tail. The cannon fire knocked out the radio shack, and then the bullet in the nose turret And then another cannon fire hit the hydraulic system, and so the plane is just saturated with purple oil, and we didn't know what was going to happen. If we were going to have an explosion, the plane's going to catch on fire, or what. And so finally I called for the pilot to send the co-pilot. He said, well, it's taken both of us to keep the ship from stalling. But I said, I got to have him. He came back. The pilot had to struggle with both knees and hands on the yoke to keep it from stalling. And the co-pilot and I were able to patch these other three fellows up. Then he went back on his duty, and the plane was so badly crippled that we should have lost it, but the pilots did a fantastic job. And instead of ditching the plane, we were told the submarine drum would be just off of the island about 20-25 miles, and you'd head in that direction, make a landing, and they'll pick you up. But we decided to try to make the base. With these injured men aboard, we wouldn't stand a chance in the water. So what I did, I took the wires that were severed on the right side of the ship. I took my arming wires from the bomb and spliced that so that if anything else broke, that would control. I then tied two parachutes to the waist section of the ship, because I knew we had no brakes. No hydraulics. You can't lower the flaps, you can't lower the wheels, but you can lower the flaps and wheels by hand. But the brakes, no. When you lose your brakes, they're gone. And so we knew we had no brakes. So I tied the chutes together at the center of the plane, one chute to the rear, got all ripcords together. And so when we touch down, all I have to do is deploy the two waist chutes, and we're going to stop. Otherwise, a very short runway from water to water, we're off into the tank, and men injured aboard. That would be a situation. So we touched down. As we touched down, I'm ready to deploy the chutes, and the plane suddenly ground loose to the left. Couldn't figure it out. Well, what happened, the bombshell that went through the window, missing my face, went into the wing of the ship, lodged into the tire, the left wheel. And so it was flat, but looking out the window, you couldn't tell it was flat. We ground loaded, and we were heading towards two fully loaded bombers with the motors running. Man, that was it. But the co-pilot inadvertently pushed the brake. He knew we had no brakes, but he just pushed it anyway, and there was just enough fluid to cause the brakes to lock quickly, and we ground looped around this way and saved us from hitting those two planes in a massive explosion, and we'd all been gone. So the Marines came out, and the doctors, and the first aid, and we went to the hospital with our men, and so the Marine doctors gave the co-pilot myself credit for having saved 3 lives, which was no big deal. That's what we're trained to do, you know. You do what you're trained to do. And so then now we're sent back to Kahuku. Our plane is totaled. We need a new crew. We're assigned a new plane, a new crew from the States with no combat experience. We had a few local search missions looking for submarines. And then we came back, and after a mission you get a couple of days off. And we're heading for the main gate on the way to Honolulu. And the operations officer comes skidding up in the Jeep and says, we just got a report. A B-25 has gone down 200 miles north of Palmyra. And where the report came from the B-25, and we began to circle. Now the cloud cover, broken clouds are at 1,000 feet. That's our search mission height. Anything below that is dangerous, and so we had to fly at 800 feet to see anything. So we flew low and swinging around here and there looking for debris in the water, life rafts, anything we could find, and suddenly the RPMs dropped on one motor, oil pressure to 0, and the pilot immediately called the new engineer, and he was so excited to do his job, he came up and nervously feathered the wrong motor. Now this plane could not fly normally on 4 motors. You couldn't get off the ground with a bomb load. It was the Green Hornet was a lemon, and with one motor out, the plane was having trouble. And now when he feathered the wrong motor, the plane just heeled over and went down left wing first, 45 degrees, hit the water and exploded. The pilot and tail gunner were fortunately blown free of the wreckage. I was trapped in. My job was to stand behind the tripod of the machine gun mount with a life raft in my against my chest. I end up under the tripod now and wedged in, and I can't move. I'm so securely wedged in. And then as the tail snapped off, the control wires, which are heavy wires that are springy. And so when the wires break, they coil up, and they go by the tripod about 1.5 inches. So when they snap, the wires coiled around the tripod. I'm in the middle, I can't get loose. Now with the wires there, it's a hopeless situation. And so I just thought, well, this is it, I'm dead. And so I started sinking. My ears popped, and that usually happens around 25, 30 feet. And then as I sank deeper, something I never had happen before, I felt like someone hit me in the sinus with a sledgehammer. And then I lost consciousness. And of course I'm sinking, I'm still sinking, so the pressure has got to be getting greater. And then I lost consciousness, and then for some unknown reason I'm conscious again. I'm freed, I'm loosened from that section of the ship. I'm flailing around with my arms trying to find something to grab onto. And fortunately my USA ring, which was on this finger, which bears the white star still there, snagged onto the waist window. And I knew that was the waist window by the feel. I grabbed it with my other hand, arched my back out of the window, inflated my life jacket, and popped to the surface. And there I saw my two buddies who were now hanging onto a gas tank. They were both in a state of shock, screaming help, and the pilot's head was bleeding profusely with a cut artery. And there's no way I can help them. If I swim over to help them, we're all dead. But I saw a life raft that had ejected from the plane automatically. And when they eject from the plane automatically, they have to be inflated. So there's a long parachute cord, about 100 feet. And when the life raft reaches its full length of the cord is stuck in, a spring is stuck in the hull of the ship. And that inflates the CO2 cartridge, right? And then the raft is fully inflated, and then the added buoyancy pulls the pin out of the plane, and so there's a 100-foot cord dragging behind the life raft. So I'm trying to swim to the life raft with shoes on, clothes, and it's impossible. Even in a swimsuit, I couldn't have caught that life raft. The currents were that vicious. But as I almost gave up swimming, this cord was going by my face. Couldn't see it in the water. And I grabbed the last 2 or 3 feet, and I reeled in the raft and got to the pilot and co-pilot, pulled them aboard, I took 2 T-shirts, made a wet compress, put on the cuts, tied it with the other T-shirt very tightly so it wouldn't bleed anymore, and laid him back. And then I started thinking about that escape. That really bugged me, and I kept thinking of any kind of a logical answer for my escape, and I just couldn't find one. So I gave up thinking about it. Instead, I started praying and thanking God for sparing my life. Well, my buddies saw this, they started to pray with me. And then it wasn't long after that, the tail gunner panicked and began to scream. It suddenly dawned on him what happened. We're all going to die, he said. I said, Mac, nobody's going to die. We're going to die, I said, Mac, nobody's going to die. And then I told him to shut up. I said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to make a report on you to the military when we get back. And he still kept screaming, so I tried to use child psychology on him, and that didn't work. So I thought I'd give him a double shock, and this is the last resort, a good shock treatment. So I turned my back on, and I came around with the back of my hand and cracked him hard across the face. He laid back in the raft, content. And he was okay for maybe 5 days or a week, and then I had to do it again. But it always seemed to work. And he never griped about it, he just laid back and seemed to enjoy it. So our menu, of course, now is, for the next 47 days, is what birds, fish, and water we could catch. And of course, the birds and the fish we simply ate raw. And during the course of...
hooks there?
What's that?
Did you have hooks with you that you...
Well, on the raft there were 2 pints of water in each raft, 2 pints, and that doesn't last long. There was a supply of chocolate, fortified chocolate with protein and vitamins and minerals. One little chunk you take 30 minutes to eat. And there was enough there in 2 rafts for about 6 people for a week. And during the course of the night, the tail gunner somehow was able to eat all that chocolate, every piece. And I thought, well, as powerful as that stuff is, it might kill him. But it didn't kill him. And, you know, we were mad, but what can you do? And as long as he wasn't screaming and losing control, I just left him alone. But he knew what he did, and he didn't even apologize for it. And so now we caught about 3 albatross. Well, we actually caught 4 albatross. We caught the first one we caught, we just ripped it open and the smell was enough, we threw it overboard. The second one we caught, I said, we got to eat some part of it, you know. And so we took the breast and we tried to take a bite out of the breast a piece and try to chew it up and swallow it. We just barely swallowed one mouthful, and again we threw it overboard and used parts of it for bait. And we did catch a small fish. We divided that in 3 ways, and that wasn't bad, raw fish. And then a lot of time went by before we got another albatross. And I thought, oh yeah, another albatross. We opened it up, and man, I'll tell you, it was like a hot fudge sundae with nuts on it. We ate everything, eyeballs. And so it was so delicious that we swore we'd eat raw meat the rest of our life. And so then the albatross, however, it's a big bird, beautiful, graceful bird, and we lay back and watched that thing fly. Pure white, we'll say, up to here, and then a razor line, and then chestnut. Beautiful thing, beautiful, graceful flying, and it was a shame to catch them and to eat them. But they land on your head, we'd catch them, and I still have white scars all over my knuckles where the birds with their serrated beak just tore the skin off of my hand when I had them by the legs. And then we were able to catch 2, well, I tried a 5-foot shark. We were looking for the smallest shark we could find, and 5 foot was it. Parachute flare cartridge, and I said, I'm going to pull a shark into the raft. When you do, the shark opens his mouth. If he bites down on you, you've had it. If he bites down on the raft's had it. So I shoved the cartridge in his mouth immediately, and so I got ready, got a hold of this 5-footer, and boy, he pulled me in, and I got back in the raft in a hurry. Now I realized that 5 foot was a little bit too much for me, so then I finally caught a 4-footer, and I just barely got him back in, cartridge in the mouth, and he bit down on it, and the raft was inadequate. It was inadequate as far as supplies were concerned. There was no knife aboard. We needed at least 1 knife. There was a pair of pliers aboard, which we never could figure out what they were for. So we had to take the brass mirror and with the pliers make 3 teeth on the edge, and then we used that to rip open the shark, which took about 20 minutes. And I mean, that mirror was sharp. I could rip open your arm from shoulder to elbow with one swish. And yet that little shark was so tough, it took me probably 15 minutes to open him up. And we were taught in survival school that the only part of the shark that can be eaten raw without getting sick is the liver, so we had liver. So that happened on 2 occasions, and of course water was our worst enemy. And but before we went 7 days without water, on the 27th day we heard motors, and you can imagine our excitement. I knew we were drifting away from the airways from Hawaii to Palmyra, but I thought, well, maybe some plane is coming off from another direction. We shot flares through what had died in the ocean, flickered our mirrors, the plane came down, and flew low. As they came towards us, we had our shirts off, you know, waving our shirts, tears in our eyes, boy, we're going to be with the Marines tonight on Palmyra, and then machine gunning. Water splash up, you know, coming at us. We see the water splash through the raft and just missed us. Nobody touched. And then I saw the red circle. I knew it was a Sally bomber, which was comparable to our B-25. And so that went on. They stretched us for about 30 minutes, which gave us some kind of calculation how far they came. And I was in the water with 2 sharks while the other 2 stayed in the raft. And the raft, the bullets coming through the bottom, and every time I came up, I knew they were dead. But they were alive, and they weren't touched, missed by 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and this was just unbelievable. So finally, and I'm in the water with 2 sharks, and of course I'm taught how to evade sharks. The last resort is straight on. You just stay there, they'll come up slowly, they'll stop, size you up, and then they'll come at you. And you got plenty of time to get your hand up there and catch them on the end of the nose, and they usually just take off, and that worked. And but after about 30 minutes, we decided we were in a hopeless situation. The raft was now wrinkled, laying flat in the water. There's no chance. We got to pretend we're dead. So we pretend we were dead, and the plane evidently bypassed us that round, but made a big circle, and we thought they were going back to base, but they decided on one more run, and this time as they came directly on course this time instead of off course, I looked out of the corner of my eye and I saw the bomb bay door open, and I thought, oh no, this is it. They dropped the depth charge. It was a canister. Now we drop bombs on submarines. They dropped a canister, and it lit about 50 feet away, which would have killed us. But the canister was improperly armed and sank to the bottom harmlessly. They did turn around then and leave us, and boy, what a relief. And then we had to start pumping that raft. With sharks around, and we're right level with the water, we're pumping like mad, taking turns, and barely got the raft up again. And now the holes are about the size of a 22 hole. That's a 7.7 millimeter, I think. And if you shot an inner tube full of holes in a swimming pool, it would not sink. And that's the way, that was our situation. And so we patched the raft up on top the best we could, cutting the canvas, putting the patch on. The patch kit was inadequate. Instead of a good roughage in there like emery cloth, which is waterproof, they had sandpaper. And there was no sand on the paper, so I had to use the cutting edge of that mirror to scratch the surface to get a patch to stick. Now the bad thing about patching the raft is you can't get the canvas back over, and the sun melts the rubber. And so it starts getting sticky, and you wait, well, when's it going to blow, you know. Then as we settled back in the raft after 8 days, which it took us about 8 days to get the raft decently patched up, and then we sat back and decided to start patching the bottom. Remember now, you got a hole in the top, you got a hole in the bottom. So, man, how do you patch the bottom? So the raft is in two sections, two rubber sections inside of a single canvas. So we had to let the air out of one side and pull the bottom up. One man held the bottom up while the other fella waited for the sun to dry the rubber. Now you're out in the middle of the ocean, and that's a tough job. You get it dry, a wave hits it. You get it dry again, a wave. It took us 10 hours to get on 8 patches on the bottom. Even when you got the rubber on there, the water hit, you had to wipe it off and start over again. And now we're all three sitting with our fannies facing this way, right over the edge of the water. And there's sharks, 2 sharks. So the tail gunner sits there facing the sharks, and his job is to keep the sharks away while we're putting the patches on. So that was a real hairy situation. Now after we got the raft in fairly decent shape after 8 days, we started calculating the plane, copied from an American B-25, what airspeed. They probably took off when we do, 7 in the morning. They had, their airspeed is so much. They have a half hour to kill over the target. So with those calculations, we were able to figure how far we were from either the Marshall or Gilbert Islands. We weren't sure which. And I picked the 47th day, the pilot picked the 46th day. And sure enough, we hit the only real big storm we had during the entire time, and it was monstrous. The waves were like 25 to 40 feet, and that was far more frightening than the Japanese airplane and far more frightening than the sharks. And we had to tie ourselves in the raft, not with knots, because you can't untie a wet knot. We'd wrap the parachute cord around our waist, under the cushion, through a grommet hole, around our waist, and loop it once and hold it. So if the raft turns over, you can unloop it and get out. And we survived that. Well, I should say the 2 of us survived that. The tail gunner died on the 33rd day, and we buried him at sea. And so the next day, of course, there were big swells, and we're on top of the swell, and I see land for the first time. Beautiful, flat-top island like they all look. And we knew we were going to drift into the islands, but we also knew these were held by the Japanese, so we had to be real careful and try to find a deserted island. And out of several islands in a lagoon, we found that all were deserted, every island. So we thought the Japanese took the natives northward for labor. And we were about to land on one island when the Japanese patrol boat came around a point and spotted us, and came by us once, missed us. Every man aboard that ship was in a state of panic. They all had their rifles, put their bayonets on. You know, you got about 25 guys with rifles aimed at you, one guy with a machine gun. You know, we were so bushed that we couldn't really laugh, but inside we were laughing. And then one man opened his shirt up, went like that. It pointed to us. And we thought, oh, they're going to shoot us in the chest. So we opened our shirts up and closed our eyes, and they didn't shoot. So then we realized that they were trying to see if we had weapons. Then they threw us a rope and pulled us aboard. We couldn't even crawl. We were that weak. And sat us on the deck of the ship and hit us with a pistol in the face. But they did give us a drink of water and a biscuit. They were taken to Woji, and they're weighed in at 30 kilo, about, I don't know, 65 pounds. So I lost about almost 100. And there we were treated decently. They pulled the raft out of from the boat and counted the holes, 48 holes, and they couldn't believe it. So the whole camp, all the officers came there and counted the holes. They were so curious about that raft. And I told them the day, the 27th day on the raft, the date that the Japanese pilot strafed us. You should be able to find out who that pilot was. Oh no, Japanese pilot wouldn't do that, but he did it. So they wouldn't accept that, even with the evidence. 2 days later, we're told we're going aboard a steamer heading for another island, and after you leave this island, we cannot guarantee your life, so we're heading for Kwaj. And we knew through the scuttlebutt that it was considered Execution Island. And so we're blindfolded, thrown into a landing barge, brought up on the beach, and we still couldn't stand up, so they had to carry us on their backs and throw us into a truck. From the pier we went to the right about a quarter of a mile and then put in these small cells. Now, the hard thing was this. We were blindfolded. The ocean, 47 days out there, all you saw was that endless sky. And the Pacific Ocean is, what, 65 million square miles, the endless ocean. Now I'm blindfolded, and when I'm inside that cell, which is 2 inches wide by 6 feet deep and 6 feet long, they take my blindfolds off. My eyes just jumped all over the place. I couldn't believe where I was. And this had a terrible effect on me. I just, in the corner of that cell, I just sat there and I looked at my skeletal frame and just started to cry. And it was, you know, here I am. 2 months ago, I was a vigorous athlete, and here I am a skeleton. And being treated like this. And then I looked around and I saw the inscription on the wall, 9 Marines marooned on Macon Island, August 18, 1942. And of course I knew the date, we knew of the raid, and we knew that James Roosevelt was second in charge, and the Carlson Raiders did it. And so that meant a lot to me. Then within, I'd say within an hour, one of the natives, the Marshallese, was allowed to come in and talk to me. And he was the first person, mind you, not an officer, Japanese, but a Marshallese. And he spoke good English. First thing he said, are you, because they had my name, are you Lou Zamperini from USC? And I about flipped. I said, what? Are you Lou Zamperini, the runner, the Olympian? I said, yeah. Why? He said, I'm a Trojan follower. So he knew all the Rose Bowl game records. Oh, he knew everything. So he was pretty sharp. And he had to have some kind of a decent job with the Japanese to be able to be the first to see me, you know. And then before he said, well, I have to leave now, my 10 minutes are up. And I said, oh, by the way, where are these Marines? And that's when he said, oh, he says, all 9 Marines were killed, were executed, killed by decapitation, samurai style. And then he very solemnly said, and that's what happens to all prisoners that come here. And I never saw him again. And so then I knew what our fate was. And when I came on duty, I'd point to confirm it, and they'd say, ah, and then you next, you know. So every day they come in and point to me and give me the throat cut. And then our new guard came on duty after about a week, and he simply looked in and said, you Christian, me Christian. That's all he could say. Well, in Japan at that time, you didn't admit you were a Christian, not in Japan. And, of course, I thought I was. Oh, me, Christian. So we started to chat on paper. We draw a picture, put a name to it, and so forth. And 2 days later, he got his monthly candy ration, shared it with me. Unbelievable. And then a bad guard, and he was consistently bad, he came on duty and threw a handful of rocks at me, coral, and he jabbed me with a stick and caught me up on the forehead. Blood ran down my cheek, dried there. Mosquitoes were all over me, flies. And the good guard, his name was Kawamura. He come on duty, and he pointed to the blood and says, Nanda. And so I gave him the guard's name. And he went like this, Kawamura, you know, I'm going to beat him up. And I understood that. But I laughed at it. I thought, well, you know, I'm his enemy. And that's one of his own buddies. And so I didn't see either guard for about 3 days. And then Kawamura comes back on duty, and he opens the door, unlocks the door, and lets me come out. And in the hallway of the door, there's no other door, just I could see the officer's quarter from there. And there was the other bad guard doing duty around the officer's quarter with a bandage on his head and a bandage on his lips. So he really beat him up. And that's amazing, you know. Our enemy, but a Christian, he felt like we were brothers in Christ, and so he fought the battle for me. And so anyway, that was Kawamura. And I tried to find him after the war, but evidently he was killed on the invasion of Kwajalein. And then we're taken into interrogation. And the Japanese, dressed in their purest white uniforms with gold braids, beautiful white tablecloth, soda pop, biscuits and pastries, and they put up a good front for us to tease us and to tempt us into talking. And if you answered their questions properly, yeah, you get something to eat or drink. But the first question to me was the radar. What does it look like? How do you operate it? Well, a good excuse. I said, hey, I was a bombardier. And there's no way you can tell them how the bomb sight works. It's so complicated. I said, the engineer does the radar. I have no idea about the radar. What does it look like? Well, it's a square box. That's all I could tell them. And so I let that question go. I'm back to my cell, listening to you. Next time, another question. I can't answer it properly. Back to my cell, nothing to eat. I thought, man, I got to get something to eat and drink. So finally, they asked me about Oahu. How many new airfields on Oahu were they bombed? And I knew there were 3 new airfields, but they were mock fields. And they wanted the Japanese to know where they were. And they had P-51s and so forth, and I had visited the fields. I couldn't believe they could make those planes look so real out of plywood. And so I pretended this was really high secret, and I wouldn't tell them. And they were after me. And again, I broke down a little bit, and then I said, no, I can't tell you, you know. And I got them all frustrated. And so finally I looked at all the drinks along the table and the food and looked at them and put on a good show. And then they asked me again, and I started to tell them, and then I stopped, and they kept asking me like this, one after the other. And they knew they had me, see. So that finally revealed. They showed me the map. I said, one there, one here, one there. They smiled at each other, and they felt victorious. They'd won the victory. And actually, I won the victory. And then I was given a glass of that soda pop and a biscuit. And so I finally won out. So in proving that we were able to outwit the Japanese officers, proved also one other thing, that we never did hallucinate on the raft. Our models were sharp and keen even on the 47th day because we made it a point to keep our minds active. My professor Roberts at USC had given us a class on the human brain. He says, like a muscle, if you don't keep it exercised, it atrophies. And so I made sure that we took inventory of our minds every morning and talked about different things to exercise the different parts of the brain. We talk about our past life. What do you remember? This went on for days. And then, what are you going to do after the war? The plans we had. And what about your girlfriend? What about your school? There was always something to talk about. And finally, they were so hungry all the time. The pilot asked me one day, you know, how do you make spaghetti sauce? So I made the spaghetti sauce for them. And like a movie, if you did that, they'd, oh no, don't talk about it, you drive me crazy. In a movie, that's the way it is. But they were eating that spaghetti sauce. They couldn't believe it. So I told them how to cook the spaghetti sauce, so every day I had to cook meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And pretty soon they got real selfish. They wanted brunch and afternoon tea, and so I'm cooking biscuits. And this was good for them. It was good for all 3 of them. It was like eating food. And by the same token, it was keeping my mind sharp to remember the recipes. They'd ask me, how much baking powder is 1 level teaspoon? Well, how long did you bake the biscuits? I said 125 for 20 minutes. And so it was that way. And so we were busy all the time, mentally busy all the time. And so when we were picked up, we were as sharp as ever, maybe sharper, because at home you don't think much. You see pictures, you watch television, listen to radio, but out there your mind does everything for you. And so I believe that kept our minds sharp even without bananas and fruits for potassium. So I'm a great believer in that, and I say there's no reason for anyone to hallucinate. And the proof was, on the raft, it was much better for us than being in that cell. The cell was so far worse than the raft, I was praying that I could get back out on the life raft and have my freedom, and the freedom of space, the freedom of ocean, and die out there. But here we are, confined in a cell, tormented daily, brainwashed, everything else. If we were to hallucinate or break down, it had to be in that cell, and yet we were able to outwit the Japanese officials. So that should tell people something. No, I don't think they should ever indicate that you're going to lose your mind out on a life raft. There's no reason for it. So anyway, from on the panel, by the way, there was one officer who admitted he was graduating from USC when I entered in 1936. And finally, every day, of course, in the morning we would think about execution. Will this be the morning? Will this be the morning? I kept looking at those names of Marines. That's the only friends I had. I had nobody to talk to. My pilot was put on the other end of the building. I couldn't make a sound towards him. So I'm looking at these names and wondering about them and who their families were, if they had a family, or their executions, where they were buried at sea, cremated, or buried on the land. I didn't know. So those were the guys I looked at every day, and knowing that our execution would finally come. And then an officer came in one day and said, you will go to Yokohama prisoners of war on with the Japanese fleet tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and we were thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And the guards, they couldn't understand it. And so we're put aboard a naval vessel, and and we go by way of truck. We stop a truck for a week, and but on this ship, when we bombed Wake Island, we sunk a ship in the harbor. And before I was declared dead during the war, they had a big article in the paper with a picture of me in my running Olympic suit, and it says on top, the war bonds. They give their lives, you lend your money. And then a picture of me running, and it says, Zamperini bombed Wake Island Christmas Eve 1942. The guys that survived that sinking of the ship were on this ship. And they saw the article. They come bearing down in the room, mad as a hornet. I looked at them, and they wanted some excuse to beat us, and they shouted out, who's going to win the war? You know, the one guy. And I said, we are. Man, they all came over and just started punching me like a bag of sand on the floor. And then finally some officers came in and stopped it, but they broke my nose in the meantime, so I had to set it. And my fingers still fit my nose where I had to hold it. And then we were separated. My pilot was sent to another room. I was sent to an officer's room up on the high deck. And it was a nice room. And it was definitely an officer's room. Pictures of the officer and his family and so forth. And I'm left alone there and not bothered. I'm sleeping on a bench couch with a little padding. And an older fellow came in every day. He didn't seem to have a uniform on or anything. He just came in laughing, came up to me, and let me know if he thumped me in the forehead, he'd give me a biscuit. And I said, hey, help yourself. So he thumped me, not hard, but he thumped me in the forehead, and he started to laugh. Then he'd give me a biscuit and leave. So every day he did that. And in the meantime, I'm looking for something to eat, so I'm lying on my back looking up under things. And I looked under one of the benches, built-in bench, and there, the support above it was a bottle of sake, about a Magnum. And I noticed it had been opened. And so I looked out the windows, didn't see anybody, so I took a swig, and that really felt good. Starving, yeah. Well, you can imagine the temptation. I had to have another shot, so next day I took another little swig and looked at the bottle and said, well, you might not miss that, so put the bottle back, and then we had a submarine scare. Man, sirens were going, the Japanese were running here and there, screaming and yelling orders, and boy, I was, uptight. Man, this is terrible. We're going to be killed by my own people, And you know how you feel when you're a little fearful and uptight, So I grabbed the bottle of sake and decided to take a couple of good long swigs, and I did. And I thought, the heck with it, if we're going to die, I want to have that sake. I got the bottle about half empty, put it back. The scare was over. The submarines didn't fire, or it was just a blunder. I don't know what it was. But everything went back to normal. Then we entered Yokohama Bay, and I'm looking down to the docks, and there's blindfolded, but I can look out the bottom and see the hubcap on a car. So it's a Chevrolet with jump seats, which I'd never seen. And I'm waiting there, and I'm waiting for this officer to come down. And this officer comes down and immediately just shoves me up against the Chevrolet, you know, for no reason. And shoves me there again. Then he shoves me, get in, get in. And I get in, I can't get my legs behind the jump seat, my long legs, and he takes the flashlight and hits me across, breaks my nose again. And you can't tell me that I didn't have his room. You can't tell me that that wasn't his sake. And he went up there before shore leave to get his sake to go see his girlfriend, and he found the sake empty, and I was the only guy in the room, so I'm guilty. So that's all I could figure out. I'm positively sure that that was his room with that kind of treatment. Up to a secret camp in the hills of Ofuna, and there I'm shoved into a room and told to stand away for further orders. And so I stand there and I see the back of a man's head, and then he turns around, leans back in the chair and looks at me and laughs. And he didn't have to say, remember me? I knew him well at USC for 3.5 years, James Sasaki. And finally says, I came back to Japan after USC and became Admiral Sasaki, that's civilian rank of Admiral, head of all interrogation all over Japan, 91 prison camps. And we talked about USC, the bacon and egg breakfast on the campus. He was talking about that kind of food, so they weren't getting it. And then he said, well, we'll see each other from time to time. And I used to ask him at USC, because every day he'd go down to the Japanese district, which was my town, Torrance, Gardena, Lomita, Carson. And I said, why do you go down there every day? Do you live there? He said, no, I go down there to lecture to the first generation Japanese to keep them faithful to the homeland. To send money home, like we'll say a Latinos do in Los Angeles. They send like $2 billion a year to their poor families. Well, that made sense. Then he says I tell them to save brass, copper, and lead. Now in those days the cigarettes and the gum wrappers were all wrapped in lead. Now I have a house in the Hollywood Hills built in 1922, and under the house I found wrappers, Chesterfields and gum wrappers, and sure enough it's lead foil. And so what the Japanese would do in school and all over town was pick up the gum wrappers and packages of cigarettes, take the foil out, and press it into a ball. When the scrap ships came down in San Pedro, which we saw, we were there, saw them unloading on the stuff they bought, rusted scrap metal. Then the Japanese families were there to make their dedication to Japan. Not because they thought there was a war coming, they didn't. And it would have been foolish for them to know. And, but that's what they were doing, saving lead foil. Even in Los Angeles, I met a Japanese who was taking care of a nightclub. And I went to his room to get something. He had 2 big balls of foil, because in a nightclub, he gets all the cigarette packs he wants. So that's what they were doing. But I said they had no idea there was a war blooming, but James Sasaki evidently did. And because he said he would go there, lecture to them, come back to SC, because they lived near the campus. And that didn't make sense to me, so I asked him again. Yep, that's what he did. I have an airfield in Torrance called Zamperini Field, and every year we have a big air fair. We draw about 30,000 people. And 2 years ago, I was out in my electric car greeting people, and the police car pulls up. And a young policeman comes out and says, I'm Officer Dufresne, and I have your book. Would you autograph it? I said, sure. I opened it up, and it was already autographed to a buddy of mine named Ernie Ashton, who later became a policeman. So I autographed it again. He says, oh, by the way, Louis, says he wrote something on another page. We turned the pages over till we found the page where Sasaki is mentioned. And on the bottom he wrote in green ink, they called him Jimmy. Jimmy Sasaki had a high-frequency transmitter just off of Torrance Boulevard, a short distance from the Edison substation, where he made broadcasts daily to the Japanese government. Then it said he left by boat 2 days before a raid by the FBI and CIA. So my friend Ernie Ashton was a stakeout for the FBI and CIA. So now we know what he was. He was a spy. And so I think that was partially the reason why we took all the Japanese and interned them. I think that was one reason, because if there was one spy in that area in Torrance, there probably were others they didn't know about. And then the other reason I believe they took him out is because you would have to be alive then to realize the hatred the Americans had. Children, students, college, everybody had this intense hatred for Japanese. And if they had lived in their towns through the war, they would have, I believe, really been sniped off. People were that mad and angry. So I think they did the right thing by taking them out, but I think they did the wrong thing in processing them and losing their property and so forth. So I think we were half right and half wrong. So in after Ofuna, this is what they call a high-profile interrogation camp. The number one, James Sasaki, is there every week. If a pilot is crashed in the morning and he's there in the evening, he's interviewed, so he's got hot news. And so I talked to Sasaki. I said, look, I was on the life raft 47 days. I was on Kwajalein 43 days. I'm on a boat a month getting to Japan. What am I doing in a high-intensity camp? I got nothing to say. I'm obsolete. And he wouldn't tell me until after the war. A year and a month after I'm there, I'm finally transferred to what they call headquarters camp Omori between Yokohama and Tokyo on a man-made island. And there I meet, as CBS said, the nightmare of my life, the bird. I come in there, he lines us up, comes by and looks at me, and I couldn't look in his eyes. I looked away and he said, why you don't look in my eyes? Bang! So I'm knocked down. I get up, knocked down again. So I'm punched out every day for the first 10 days, and I knew who the boss was, that's for sure. And so he was so brutal. The other guards, we gave him vile, filthy names. We didn't give him a filthy name. We simply called him the Bird, because if he did find out through scuttlebutt that we named him a certain name, then we're really in for trouble. Now, he was a son of a wealthy family. He flunked out of officer school, so they had him for officers. And I can remember when we had a B-29 raid, he called all the Americans out. And he separated the officers from the enlisted men. And then he had all the lowest rank enlisted men, just to shame us, buck privates, face us, and each one had to punch us and knock us down. And they wouldn't hit us hard, they'd hit us easy, and then they'd get hit with a club. Hey, hit us hard, knock us down, get it over with. So we had to take a full blow in the face, down on the ground, and so that's the way he was. He took it out on officers, always. Officers got the punishment. And finally I was approached by the Radio Tokyo. 2 men came and said, we will allow you to make a broadcast to your parents. You write what you want to say, we'll be back tomorrow. So I wrote what I wanted to say. They took me to Radio Tokyo, showed me this new building, showed me the cafeteria, all beautiful stainless steel like an American restaurant, showed me a hotel room inside of the Radio Tokyo, clean sheets, and so forth. We're sleeping on planks with bed bugs lined up in between all night long. You're eating, your body's eating to a whelp. Every morning you're up and you got bugs all over you. In the lining, they spit, nose to tail on our lining. We get our clothes boiled, the next day they're full of bugs again. So they were showing me this stuff to tempt me for something in the future. And then they introduced me to an American and 2 Australians who were making broadcasts. And they shook my hands and looked down at the floor, and somehow I knew they were sending me 2 messages. We're ashamed we've done this, and don't you do it. And so then I complained about the Bird. Well, yeah, we see what we can do about it. So back to the camp we go, and the beatings continue. A week later, they come back and say, oh, you have beautiful radio voice, you're flattering me now, we want you to make another broadcast, smiling. So, again, it's in the middle of winter, February, I believe. They put a big overcoat on me to keep me warm. They had a warehouse full of them, but we didn't get them in the wintertime. We just froze. And I get into Radio Tokyo, walk into the office, and now they hand me one of several sheets on the table. we want you to read this, make a recording, we play it over Tokyo Rose. And so I read it, and of course it was propaganda. It wasn't hardcore, but then this was subtle propaganda. You do that one, now they got you, they got the hook in, right? And now the next sheet will be a little more powerful and more powerful. And I read it and said, no, there's no way I can do it. I just can't. You've got to do it. No, absolutely not. I just can't do it. So then they got their heads together in another room, and when they left, I reached through the slit in my pocket and I stole a copy of the the broadcast, which I was able to bring all the way back from Japan and gave to the War Crimes Trial. And so they came back in and gave me one more chance. And then they said, I think you go to punishment camp. And I thought, boy, anything's better than going back to the bird, you know. I didn't care what kind of a camp it was. And so I go back to Omori, and a week later the bird's transferred. So now I'm uptight. I got friends here, the Royal Scots, the English, the New Zealanders, Australians, Americans, and I hate to leave them. But about another week went by, and I believe there were 6 or 7 of us lined up, put on a train, and now we're crossing Tokyo. But see, in the meantime, they had the big fire raid on Tokyo, which we saw from our vantage point. We saw the sky aglow all night and half the next day. And we put on the train and we go right through that charred waste. And all we could see for miles, 19 square miles of charred, you know, bamboo huts or whatever, wooden shacks. But the only thing we were able to identify were the hundreds of lathes. What the Japanese did, they did like the Germans. Their factory was bombed, but it didn't slow them down because the big factory, the industrial complex at the point of Tokyo, they only had part of their machinery there. The rest of it was in the civilian homes. And I remember going to the slaughterhouse to pick up our meat, which was horse guts in a wheelbarrow. And I used to see these transformers, and I thought, my golly, for this little house, I'd look back and I'd see a lathe, great big $25,000 lathe, and the guys working, making parts. And all down the street. So it was really strange to see the only thing not burnt were all those machines. And that was the reason Truman had the firebombing of Tokyo, was because that was the industrial complex. So now we're going north 12 hours to right through Nagano and down to the ocean to Naoetsu. And in that area it usually snows 1 or 2 feet a year, but they had a 10-foot snowfall. And here we are walking in over the roofs of houses. And we get to the prison compound, we have to stand there at attention and wait for further order. Now, we waited and watched the front door of the guard shack, and whoever was in there was making us wait purposely. And we waited and waited and waited, and the door opens and out steps the bird. Well, my knees buckled. I just couldn't believe it. I just thought, you know, I'm a guy that never gives up. But I got to the point where I just thought, it's hopeless, hopeless. I can't escape this guy. But I, you know, like the British said, you know, keep a stiff upper lip. And so I got back to attention, and then I had to put up with him all over again. And that was murder being in a slave labor camp, because you have no choice. They come up to the officers, you're going to have to work. But just to tease us, they line up the officers, and they say, tomorrow you go to work. Well, we're trained. According to international law, an officer is not supposed to work. Bang, get hit on the head from behind, down he goes. The next guy, you go to work tomorrow. According to it, and that's as far as he got knocked out. He came to me, they said, tomorrow you go to work. I said, what kind of work? So I didn't get hit. And I knew I'd have to go to work anyway, and I'm not going to let them hit me on the head and knock me out again. So sure enough, we had to go to work. Heavy labor. The filthiest labor of all, emptying cargo ships of coal and salt, and that is brutal. The coal, you're breathing black dust all day long in the hold of the ship, and you have a certain length of time to empty a big 10,000-ton ship. And you're shoveling that coal and you're breathing black dust, and they're on you all the time, hurry, faster, faster. And then the barge comes out, and we have to, they take the nets, pull them up, and unload them in the barge. Then in the evening we get aboard the barge, take it up the river and anchor it, and then the next day we have to carry the coal in wicker baskets up a ramp to a half car, unload it so they can ship it all over Japan. And that's where I got injured, carrying a load of coal, about maybe 80 pounds on my back. And I was shoved off of the walkway, which is about 2 or 3 feet above the ground, going up to the half car. and I fell and tore all the ligaments in my knee and ankle, and well, when you don't work in Japan, you get half rations. So now we're hardly able to live on full rations, which was a bowl of millet and just plain seaweed. We had to catch our own food out in the ocean with a hook, pull in the seaweed. They just took it as it was and boiled it. And when they boil it, it becomes very, like, you know, very gooey, like snot. And then you ate that, it was like rubber. And you chew it up, it was like rubber. It came out like rubber. And there may have been some nourishment in it, but I got half rations. And now I'm really disappointed. And finally, I was looking in a back room, and I saw a white sewing machine. Now, there's Singer and White back in the old days. My mother had a White. And I was sewing at 5 years of age. And so I got an idea to get a job where I could get full rations. So I got this guard, and his coat was sloppy. I said, oh, you know, no good, Hollywood. You know, that's all he thought about was Hollywood. American athletes in Hollywood. And so this guard took his coat off, and I cut it down for him. He put it on, and man, he looked trim. The bird saw it. Boy, he came in, and a little mad because he wasn't first. And so he gave me his clothes, and I cut him down for him, made him look trim. And I did all the guards. Then when I'm through, there's no more work, but I got full ration. And then on another occasion, I didn't apply for the job, but they wanted their hair cut. And I thought, well, no big deal. Their heads are shaved. You know, I just take the clippers and just, you know, no artistic talent for that. So I volunteered. And then they handed me a straight edge. A barber cuts the hair and shaves. So I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. Because they said, you cut me? You know, so I had to go in and practice on myself, and I was cutting myself. And after about 3 days, I got fairly good, and so I took a chance, and I did nick a couple of them a little bit, and but they wanted their face shaved, but they also wanted their forehead shaved, so they had no hair. And then they wanted the top of their eyebrows, the hairs that were staggered, they wanted the staggered ones cut off. So I did that, and they gave me a rice ball. So each guard that I shaved and cut his hair, he'd give me a rice ball, except one guard, and he was what we call the weasel. He looked like a weasel, and he wouldn't give me a rice ball. So days went by, and he'd come back and wanted another shave and a haircut. And I said, you owe me a rice ball. Oh. I did the same thing, no rice ball. So I'm getting really uptight. And so the third time he came in, and they just lay there, you know, relaxed, fall asleep while you're shaving. It feels so good, you know, you're cutting their hair. So I shaved his eyebrows on the top down as low as I could get them, then I trimmed the bottoms and made his eyebrows real narrow and thin like a pencil line. And I thought, I'll get even with him. So he goes back to the guard shack. He goes inside to look in the mirror to look over his new face do and so forth. And he began to scream and yell, and I knew I was in trouble. And then all of a sudden he hollered, Marlena Dietrich, Marlena Dietrich. So he had the same eyebrows she had in the movie, so that was kind of funny. But I knew he was going to come out and raise heck with me. But the other guards rushed in to see what was wrong, and they started laughing. And so when they laughed, there was no way he was going to come out and punish me. So that was the end of hair cutting, but I did get a full ration of food. So then about 8 days before the war's over, we get one of the guards came to me and said, a sad thing happened in Japan. A city called Hiroshima, cholera broke out. No one's allowed to go in. It's quarantine. And yeah, we thought that was sad. So the whole nation of Japan knew that Hiroshima was a city quarantined with cholera. And then about 8 days later, we're told to pay PW on the roof. And we'd heard rumors about the war being over for 2 years, so it didn't mean much. We were allowed to go into the river and swim, which we'd never been able to do before, and we thought, well, maybe something is happening. But we wouldn't believe it till we saw a TBF fly over the river, and they saw all the prisoners in the river, and they flashed on their red light, and the radio man picked it up, the war's over. So then we rushed up to the compound and began to wave at the plane. He circled and circled. Then he dropped the red ribbon. On the end of it was a candy bar with a bite out of it, and a pack of cigarettes with 2 cigarettes gone. And yet 350 men got a puff of cigarette, and we all got a sliver of candy. Pretty good. that evening he came back and we looked like a body falling. It was a pair of Navy pants tied at the bottom and top, and cartons of cigarettes and candy, and Commander Fitzgerald of the Grenadier submarine, the ranking officer, he opens the pants and right on the top was a magazine. And he just stood there silently looking at that picture of the atomic bomb, because we'd never heard of it. And he kept looking at it, and the other officers walked up. We all looked over his shoulder and looked at that picture, took it out, and there was kind of a silence until we read to see what it was. And then I realized the date of the cholera at Hiroshima was the same date, so actually what happened was the bomb, and the Japanese pulled the eyes over the general public by telling him it was cholera, which was the best thing they could have done. So finally, the bird, 2 days before we actually knew the war was over, the bird disappeared. And because we had a 70-pound rock on the second floor right over the river, and a rope. We had it hidden away in the bulk of the building, and we were going to grab him, tie the rock on him, and throw him over into the river. And that was our intention. But he flew the coop, so we didn't see him again. And the other guards all started bowing and scraping, and we felt sorry for them, and we knew they had families at home that weren't eating too well. And typical American, we started giving the guards food to take home to their children and stuff like that, candy. And then we're told that we cannot be repatriated for about 10 days because of all the prison camps. And they repatriated those closest to Tokyo, or Yokohama, I should say. And so we got organized as a military unit with the submarine commander in charge, made insignia out of old aluminum. And so just overnight we were a military group. German families living along that stretch between Tokyo all to the mountain range. And so they were polytechnicians, and they were back in the mountains to be safe. We finally got to Yokohama, and we were told that we were going to go into a big building, and there we would get all the coke, Well, the train stops, we know where the food is, the cokes and coffee and donuts, and every prisoner's making a beeline for that building. And there was a fellow out there hollering and yelling, "Who's got a good story? Who's got a good story?" And on that video, the guy on the right, that was Frank Tinker, and he said, "Oh, this guy's got a good story." The guy grabs me, and all my buddies are in there getting filled up. And he was from the New York Times, Robert Trumbull, and he wanted to interview me, and I kept trying to get away. He wouldn't let me get away. I said, "Look, I got to get some donut, I got to get some Coke." And he finally sent a guy in to get something for me. He never came back. And, you know, it took a good half hour, and I was really uptight. I was mad. I went inside, and there was nothing left. Nothing. I looked all over the floor for crumbs, anything to eat. And now they come up to me, and they stuck a tube down my shirt and blew in a bunch of white stuff, and that was sulfur, I guess. And we were all deloused. And then we're heading for the airport. And on the way out, I see the quartermaster, the window's open, and here's a big stack of K rations. And I just rushed up and just shoving those in my shirt on one side, on the other side. And the sergeant said, "Hey, man, you're going to get all you want. Where you going? All the food you want." I said, "That's what they told me when I came here. I can't take any chances." So I took the K ration and started snacking on that. We get aboard a ship, land at Okinawa. And now the shock of my life. It was such a shock that CBS didn't dare use it. I go to the mess with the rest of the prisoners of war, and they check them off on a list. I am not listed as a prisoner of war. They wouldn't let me have a meal. I could not eat, and I couldn't believe it. I went back to the prison, to the Red Cross tent. Told the girl my story. So she had some snacks there, crackers and candy and stuff like that. I'm sitting there depressed, and an officer walks in and says, "Oh, here's someone that can help you." And he was the general's adjutant, and I told him briefly my story. He took me up to the general, and he said, "Are you in a hurry to go home?" I said, "No, I'd like to get fattened up a bit." He said, "Well, I want to keep you here." He called a Dr. Eli Lipman from New York and put him in charge of me. He had a big tent. They had underground, small hospital, but mainly storage underground, alcohol and all the medical things. And got my first shower. And then the 11th Bomb Group, which was my group, was there, and they heard about it. They threw me a party. And then the nurses at the hospital heard about my experience. They threw me a party. So I was having a ball on Okinawa. I didn't want to go home. I wanted to get fattened up. And then I got a red letter order from General Arnold and demanding I come home to speak during the half of a football game in the Coliseum, I think the Army and Navy or something. And I didn't want to go home. The doctor says, tell me you don't want to go home and I'll fix it. So he sends a wire, you know, unable to travel, ill and so forth, which was good for me, but my mother almost panicked. She thought, oh, my son is dying, you know. So I got to stay there, and then a typhoon moves in. And I'm in this tent. In the meantime, the warnings are up. They tie a rope from the tent, which is a sturdy tent. The rope goes from there to the outhouse about, 20 yards away. And I'm still having stomach problems from POW life. And right in the middle of that typhoon, I'm on that rope getting out to the outhouse. I get there, I just get seated down, and the outhouse goes up in the air, and I'm there alone, blown over immediately over the side of a hill, and I'm sliding down this mud. And I knew I had to get back up, and I had to come back up, like a turtle. And I finally got back up on the flat ground. I got over to the tent, held on to the post, and then Dr. Eli Lippman opened the underground hospital door and had me come over there and inside. And so that was my Okinawa experience. And then I missed a plane to Guam, and so I get a plane to Manila. It was a B-24, and it made me just sick to my stomach to think I had to get back in a B-24. And there were plywood decks, 45 prisoners, and I'm among them. They say you can't land at you can't land at Manila because of a storm. You have to land at a fighter field in northern Luzon called Loag. So we landed there between two mountains. Overnight, we got clearance to take off from Manila, and there's no wind. We're down the runway, short runway, and I know there's something wrong. So I look out the window, and I see the end of the runway right at the ocean, a pile of dirt that was put there to keep the water from hitting the runway. And I thought, well, after all I've gone through, I'm dead now. And the plane hit that pile of dirt, bounced in the air, and then as it settled down, the Whitecaps came through the bomb bay doors and soaked us, so we knew we'd hit the water and we were dead. And the plane gradually pulled up. It was just the Whitecaps that came through the doors. Now the doors they're quarter inch from the side of the plane, so water does come through there. And we got to Manila, but it's really neat that a month after I got back from Nagano making that TV show for CBS, I got a call on the phone, and this guy was curious about how I got from Okinawa to Manila. He said, then what happened? Then what happened? I told him. He said, I was the pilot, and he said, I wet my pants. So he thought he'd had it. So that was kind of neat. Then I got a call the same week from a nurse. She says, do you remember riding from the party that the nurse threw you back to your compound? I said, yes. She said, well, I was the nurse with you in the back seat. So that was kind of neat. So finally I'm flown from Manila to Guam and then back to Hawaii, and of course everybody's throwing us a party. The great Duke Hanamoku took me in tow, took me out on the canoe, made me a member of the Outrigger Canoe Club, and I'm having a ball. I don't want to come home, and suddenly I get another red letter order from General Arnold, and I'd never met him, but a close friend of mine was a buddy of his from Warner Brothers Studios. And this letter, I can't tell you exactly what it said, but it was something like, get your butt back here with every available dispatch. So I knew I was in hot water, so I grabbed the first plane, flew back to the States. I landed in Frisco and taken to the hospital there. And my brother's in the Navy in San Diego. He's losing all kinds of weight, worrying about me during the war, so he's practically a skeleton. I'm all fattened up, right? We're at the hospital, in comes the press to do a story on the prisoner of war, and they grab my brother and get him aside, and they start interviewing him. And they picked him as the prisoner of war because he was skinny and I was fattened up. And that was really ironic. And then General Arnold had a special B-25 sent to Frisco to pick me up and take me to Long Beach, where my folks met me, and home to Torrance, and I got my hometown welcome, seeing my family for the first time, and that was one of the thrills of my life, to see my family. And of course, they never gave up hope, and a lot of mothers and dads didn't give up hope, but their kids never came back. So I was one of the fortunate ones. And that's the story. Now, I must say that after the war, in fact, when the war was over, sleeping in tent on the way home, I still had nightmares about the bird. I'm Italian, I have to have revenge, and when he's torturing me and punishing me, I'm getting revenge in my heart, and my hands are clenched. I got him by the throat, and that was in my dreams every night, every night, every night. I got home, it was the same thing at home. I got married, I still had the nightmares. In the meantime, I started drinking because of that, but before I started drinking heavily, I started training for the '48 Olympics. And I did get in good shape, and then when I had my knee give out and my ankle and a muscle spasm or like an explosion in my calf, I couldn't train anymore, and I gave that up, and that really hurt me. And so I started drinking more and more, and my wife decided it's time for a divorce. And somebody in our apartment house was telling us about a fellow named Billy Graham. We never heard of him. They talked my wife into going down to hear Billy Graham. He made a decision for the Lord, came home that night, tried to talk me into it, and I said, keep away from it. I don't want to hear any more about religion. And but she said something that really struck me in the heart, and that was, and because of my decision, I'm not going to get a divorce. So that was good news. But the next day she was all over me, and I refused to go. She and her friends were after me for the whole week, and finally they more or less tricked me into going down to hear Billy. And there he's preaching, for all of sin. Well, I knew I was a sinner. Well, I didn't like the idea of him reminding me, and it just gave me an excuse to leave. I got mad, grabbed my wife, pulled her home, and the next day she's all over me again. And so I finally consented on a return trip, and I said, well, when he finishes his sermon and says every head bowed, I'm getting out. Okay. So back we went, and I kept quoting scripture from the Bible, and I knew what I should do, but I didn't want to do it. And then as I started to leave the tent, I started thinking back on the raft. When our lives were spared, we did pray morning, noon, and night, and we prayed constantly on the raft. In this cell on Kwajalein, man, my prayers were intensified. This was brutal, and I prayed for relief. I prayed for God to spare my life. My relief came in the way of dengue fever. That really made my stay less painful. My prayer was always, God, save my life, and I'll seek you and serve you. All through Kwajalein, all through my 2.5 years in Japan, and here I am home alive. My prayers were answered, and I completely turned my back on those promises. That hit me pretty hard before I got to the aisle, where I decided to turn out. No, I stopped momentarily, made my decision, went back to the prayer room, and made my confession of faith in Christ, and there a miracle took place. My life completely changed. I had a turnabout. I knew that I was through getting drunk. I knew it obviously to myself. I knew I'd forgiven all my guards. I knew I'd forgiven the bird. And I think proof of that was that night I didn't have a nightmare for the first time. And it's been 2.5 years, and I haven't, and since the war, and I had a nightmare every night. And now from 1949 till this day, I've still never had a nightmare, or even the slightest inkling of a nightmare. And so when I met with the studio to make the movie with Universal, Burlstein, the top producer, the movie is going to be made with Nicolas Cage. The producer was hearing all the things the bird did to me, and I'm sitting at this meeting like this, listening to these fellows talk. And finally he's getting really uptight, and he jumped up and he said, Louis, how could you forgive that so-and-so? And I stood up and I said, well, I can only give you one verse in the Bible why I could forgive him. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new person. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. And he looked at me. I didn't know what he's going to do. And he rushed over and grabbed me around the waist, picked me up and said, we're going to make this into a major film. So I thought that was pretty neat, him being Jewish and not mentioning Christ. So that was the climax. That was just beautiful. And so Burlstein, the real friend, a real outgoing guy, and real honest. So the script's been finished. I don't know when they're going to start the movie, but that's the next thing on the agenda. So that's my story.
It's amazing.
Wonderful. amazing.
Like, I know you've been back to Japan and everything, now come back here. How hard is it to step off that plane into a place like this?
Well, they were both a, well, all I can really say, and use the familiar terms, yes, when I went to Japan, Naoetsu, when I left Japan, I didn't want to look back at Naoetsu. Horrible existence. I hated Japan. Get out of here. I want to get home. And yet when Coca-Cola and CBS got me over there to carry the torch, when the mayor and the head of the Peace Park, now the Peace Park is land on the confluence of two rivers. That was our prison camp. Now when we were there, the school children at that time, when the war was over, they found out what happened there. They found out how many people died, over 60 Australians alone. They, as they grew up and got jobs, they formed a group, pooled their forces, got their money and bought that expensive property and started what they call the Peace Park. And they spent money for statues and angels and everything else. And so they also wrote me and said, when you come here, we'll line the streets and cheer you on when you carry the torch. When I met these Peace Park people, I was really amazed. They were so loving. They said, we have built this Peace Park. We don't want our children, their children, or their children ever to forget what happened here. Out of 91 cities that had prison camps in Japan, that's the only city that's done that. And they had to fight like mad to do it against the opposition. And with people like that, full of love in their hearts, and the mayor of the city, you know, so to speak, gave me the keys to the city. When I left there, after what they did for us, banquets and parties for my daughter and I, my wife didn't go. She wanted her daughter to have the experience. It was unbelievable. And I just, when I left there, I gave a little 2-3 minute talk at the banquet. That the love and concern that they showed me there more than made up for my 2.5 years in Japan. And I really meant that. And so that was, as they call it, full circle closure for me as far as Japan was concerned. But during the years, as I see Kwajalein on the map, or I hear about Kwajalein, the missile base and all that, it sent chills up my spine, because the only Kwajalein I knew was that little cell. And so it was a dirty word to me, so to speak. And then when somebody in our church gave me this material on Kwajalein, said, well, my sister works there. And so her sister left the package, her name, Doris, and a phone number, which was the Los Angeles phone number. So I thought, well, I'll call and thank her. And so I called, and the man answered the phone, and he didn't sound coherent, you know. And I thought, well, you better let me talk to your wife. She's in the States. I said, well, where are you? He said, I'm on Kwajalein. I said, what time is it? 3 in the morning. I said, I'm sorry. So anyway, that was the way it was. And then we got together, and then I found my deposition I wrote for the government after the war about Kwajalein and the interrogation here. And I also put it together for History Channel, did a special on sworn to secrecy, all about interrogation. So they used it on their show. So I sent her a copy so they'd know exactly what my position was on Kwajalein, almost word for word. And so then I find out I'm being invited down. And in the meantime, we found out my wife's got cancer. And we have 2 days before we meet Doris in Hawaii and fly down here, and we had to cancel. And then finally, February 22nd, my wife died, and then they got the thing rolling again and picked a date, and so my daughter came with me on this trip. So I would say again that I've completed the circle, and this is really fulfillment for me for the entire war. There's nothing else to fulfill. And it's great being here under the same circumstances, being treated like a king here, and being able to speak to the school children. That was so wonderful. And being invited to all the homes and all the functions in town, it is, you know, really fulfilling, yes. So now I'll go home and I'll think of Kwajalein in that respect. And if there was ever another chance to come back, yeah, I'd look forward to that chance. Because Kwajalein is a different place than I pictured in my mind, and so that is real, genuine fulfillment. Also, the loving concern of the people here toward me, and even the military. I'm just thrilled beyond words. And I feel like I've been here one day only. And so naturally I will think often of Kwajalein and think of the beautiful trade winds passing over the island, fresh air, and I'm in LA trying to see something in the smog and breathing that smog. No, this is, well, I guess after my first day here I called it a utopia in the Pacific.
Well, we're glad you came and visited.
Well, thank you so much.